The day started like every other on Solara 9, loud, metallic, and filled with the smell of ozone and burnt protein packs. Lieutenant Mason Hale had never been good at mornings, and zero-gravity mornings were even worse. Somewhere between his second cup of synthetic coffee and his third argument with the ship's locker AI, "No, I don't want the lavender-scented undersuit. Stop judging my choices." He began to suspect the day was going to turn ugly. He was right. Joint training days with the Elthurians always felt like balancing on a plasma wire. The alien warriors were graceful, stoic, and unnervingly quiet, while the humans, well, Mason had a habit of filling silence with bad jokes and mild chaos. Today's session was supposed to be a simple tactical sync exercise on Deck 12, a phrase that in practice meant 1,000 things could explode while the instructor calmly took notes. The Elthurians were already there when he arrived. They stood in formation, tall and elegant, their porcelain-like skin gleaming faintly under the training deck lights. Mason spotted her immediately, Captain Lyra T. Varon, the infamous Iron Whisper of the Elthurian vanguard. Her reputation was legend, unmatched in battle, unflinching in command, and utterly humorless. The kind of woman who could probably dismantle a tank with a glare. When she turned toward him, her eyes, electric blue, unnaturally bright, met his for a second, and he felt something shift inside him, some primal instinct screaming, "Don't mess this up." He tried to smile. She didn't. "Lieutenant Hale," she said, her voice smooth but sharp. "Do humans always arrive 2 minutes late to synchronization drills?" "Only the charming ones, ma'am," Mason replied before his brain could veto the line. She blinked once, expression unreadable, then turned away with the faintest flick of her long, tapered ears. The exercise began. The goal: move through a simulated combat corridor, eliminate holographic hostiles, and maintain formation with your alien partner. Simple enough in theory. In reality, it was like trying to dance through a minefield with a partner who could kill you with her pinky. Lyra's movements were precise, fluid, almost artistic, each strike from her plasma staff a flash of light and motion. Mason followed behind, trying not to look like an uncoordinated meat puppet. "Your footwork is inefficient," she said over comms. "Yeah, I was going for a more interpretive style," he replied, ducking under a laser drone. "Humans call it freestyle survival." "That explains much," she said dryly. They reached the final corridor, narrow, dim, with flickering emergency lights. Lyra stepped forward to scan for remaining drones. Mason moved to follow, his boots catching on a loose magnetic coupling. He stumbled forward, gravity flickering for half a second. Time slowed. His outstretched hand flailed for balance and landed squarely on the armored curve of Captain Lyra T. Varon's backside. For 3 glorious seconds, the universe held its breath. Lyra froze. Mason froze. Even the simulation drone seemed to pause midair, as if the ship itself were trying to give him a chance to make this less catastrophic. He didn't take it. "A gravity glitch," he stammered, withdrawing his hand like it had touched molten plasma. "Total accident. No disrespect intended, Captain. Your, armor's very stable." She turned slowly. Her gaze could have vaporized steel. "Get your hands off my ass, human." Mason opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Technically, they're already off. Her nostrils flared slightly. Somewhere behind them, a human cadet snorted, then tried to disguise it as a cough. Lyra's head turned just enough for everyone else to suddenly remember they had urgent tasks elsewhere. Mason, on the other hand, began writing his own obituary in his head. The exercise ended moments later. Lyra dismissed the squad in silence and walked off the deck without another word. Mason stood alone, staring at the metallic floor, trying to process whether he just committed cultural suicide. That evening, the rumor spread faster than a plasma burst. By dinner, every human officer aboard Solara 9 had heard the story of the human who touched the Iron Whisper. Even the kitchen AI made a joke when serving him a nutrient pack. "Would you like to add extra spice, Lieutenant? Captain T. Varon might appreciate your bold seasoning." He tried to laugh it off, but the truth was, he couldn't stop replaying it. The way she looked at him, not just angry but puzzled, as if she couldn't quite decide whether to slap him or study him. He caught himself wondering what Elthurians even thought about touch. Were they as guarded as they seemed? Did they ever joke? His bunkmate, Sergeant Leto, grinned from across the table. "Well, Mason, if you're gonna die, at least it'll be for making history. No one has ever lived after slapping an Elthurian captain." "It wasn't a slap," Mason muttered. "It was an uncontrolled gravitational correction." "Sure," Leto said, laughing. "That's what I'll tell your tombstone." When the ship lights dimmed to night mode, Mason lay in his bunk, staring at the faint glow of the ceiling conduits. He imagined her face again, sharp, unreadable, framed by silver hair tied in a warrior's braid. He could almost hear her voice, low and calm, saying his name like an accusation. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. "Nice going, Hale," he muttered. "One accidental butt grab and you've probably started the first interspecies incident since the Orion Treaty." But somewhere deep down, under the embarrassment and fear, something else stirred. A faint spark of curiosity, impossible to ignore. Because for just a second, before the anger, before the glare, he could have sworn she almost smiled. The next morning, Mason woke up to the shriek of the ship's alarm, which turned out not to be an emergency but his bunkmate's terrible attempt at customizing the morning alert. He groaned, rolled over, and smacked the control panel until the noise stopped. "If I survive this deployment," he muttered, "I'm filing an official complaint about your playlist, Leto." The sergeant, brushing his teeth with the calmness of a monk, replied through a mouthful of foam, "You won't have to. Captain T. Varon will vaporize you before the week's out." Mason stared at him. "Thanks for the optimism, friend." When he finally dragged himself to the mess hall, every conversation seemed to stop for half a beat. The crew tried to act casual, but there were too many poorly suppressed grins. A few officers at the far end raised their cups of synthesized coffee in mock salute. Someone even whispered, "Dead man walking." Mason took his tray, pretended not to notice, and found an empty seat beside the window where the stars streaked silently by. He was halfway through a forkful of algae scramble when his wrist communicator buzzed. The message glowed across the hollow display. "Report to my quarters, 2200 hours. CPT, Lyra T. Varon." The fork froze halfway to his mouth. His brain needed a moment to process the implications. Maybe this was it. Official reprimand, written apology, maybe a symbolic duel to the death. The possibilities were endless and all terrible. "Leto," he whispered, "if I don't come back tonight, tell my family I went out like a hero, a confused, deeply embarrassed hero." By the time 2200 approached, Mason had changed uniforms 3 times. He settled on the least wrinkled one and practiced potential apologies in the mirror. "Captain, I assure you, it was an involuntary reflex." No, that sounded like he was blaming his hands. "Captain, I was merely falling in your general direction." Worse. "Captain, may I compliment your—" and he stopped himself before completing the sentence that would get him airlocked instantly. When he finally arrived at her door, it slid open with a soft hiss, revealing quarters unlike anything he'd imagined. The walls shimmered with holographic projections of alien flora, bioluminescent vines and floating petals that pulsed in shades of silver and violet. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something floral, sharp but pleasant. Lyra stood at the center, still in her dark armor, her posture perfect. She turned slightly toward him, her long ears catching the light. "Lieutenant Hale," she said evenly, "you're punctual, I'm surprised." He tried to smile, but his mouth felt dry. "Yeah, I figured being late would just compound the existing list of my crimes." Her eyes narrowed for half a second before she gestured to the seat opposite her. "Sit." Mason obeyed, half expecting a laser blade to appear from under the table. Instead, Lyra poured him something into a crystalline cup. The liquid shimmered faintly blue. "Elthurian comroot tea," she said. "It aids clarity." He sniffed it cautiously. "Smells like someone boiled a glow stick." Her expression didn't change, but her ears twitched, the faintest sign of amusement. "It's not toxic to humans, probably." "That's comforting," he said and took a careful sip. It tasted like mint and static electricity. For a long moment she studied him in silence, and Mason's mind ran wild. Maybe she wanted him to confess. Maybe this was a trap. Maybe she was going to challenge him to a ceremonial duel involving plasma whips. Finally, she spoke. "You touched me during the training exercise." He nearly choked on the tea. "Yes, completely by accident, gravity hiccup, absolute misfire. I have terrible balance in zero-G, I swear." "I know," she said simply. That threw him off. "You know." Lyra nodded slightly, her tone still unreadable. "I reviewed the hollow footage. It was clumsy, not insolent." "Thank the stars," Mason muttered under his breath. "I was preparing my last words." "Still," she continued, "you do not understand what that gesture means among my kind." He blinked. "I'm afraid to ask." In Elthurian combat culture, to make physical contact with an officer during active motion is a mark of trust. It signifies a belief that the other will not retaliate. Few would dare it. Mason stared. "So, you're saying I accidentally honored you?" Her eyes glimmered faintly, and this time her lips curved into something dangerously close to a smile. "In a manner of speaking." He leaned back, relief flooding through him, and then immediately regretted it. "Well, Captain, if it's all the same to you, I'd prefer my honors to involve fewer awkward hand placements next time." The corners of her mouth twitched. "Your humor is inefficient but disarming." "I get that a lot," he said, "mostly from ex-girlfriends and commanding officers." She regarded him silently for another long moment, then said, "You are not like the others." "Yeah, I get that a lot too," he said, smiling weakly. "Usually right before something explodes." Lyra's gaze softened just slightly. "I summoned you not for punishment but to understand. You risk disgrace rather than lie. That is uncommon among humans." He tilted his head. "Among Elthurians too, I'd wager." A pause. Then almost imperceptibly she nodded. "Perhaps." The silence stretched between them, oddly comfortable now. Mason looked around, trying to process the surreal turn his night had taken. "So, to summarize," he said finally, "I accidentally committed a sacred act of trust, nearly caused a diplomatic incident, and now I'm drinking alien tea in your quarters." "That is accurate," she said. "Great," he replied. "My career's either doomed or about to get really interesting." Lyra tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she hadn't decided whether to solve or admire. "You're reckless, Lieutenant. But you are honest. That is a rare combination." He grinned. "I try my best, usually by accident." For the first time she laughed quietly, like the sound of crystal breaking light. It lasted only a moment, but it felt like hearing a secret. Mason sat back, staring at her in disbelief. "You laugh. That's new." "Do not tell anyone," she said, standing. "I have a reputation to maintain." He raised his cup in mock salute. "My lips are sealed, Captain." As he left her quarters, the door sliding shut behind him, Mason couldn't stop smiling. Somewhere deep in the hum of the ship, something had shifted. Maybe it was just the engines. Or maybe it was something far more dangerous, an understanding forming where none should exist. Either way, he had a feeling the universe had just gotten a lot more complicated. The next few days aboard Solara 9 passed in a haze of rumor, paperwork, and the kind of awkward glances one only receives after committing an interspecies cultural faux pas. Mason did his best to focus on duty, but his mind kept replaying that surreal tea conversation in Lyra's quarters. He hadn't been spaced, demoted, or reassigned, which was a relief. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, subtle, dangerous, and way beyond the scope of the ship's regulations. When the next joint training session arrived, he told himself to stay professional. No jokes. No physics-related hand slips. No attempts at humor whatsoever. Just follow her lead and survive. Lyra stood at the far end of the deck, checking a holographic map projected from her wrist console. Her silver hair was tied high in a sleek braid. her armor gleaming like liquid graphite under the training lights. She looked every bit the unapproachable warrior she'd always been. Except now, Mason swore he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes when he approached. "Lieutenant Hale," she said, tone perfectly neutral. "Captain," he replied, saluting stiffly. "Ready to not embarrass myself this time. That remains to be seen." The simulation field activated, filling the deck with holographic walls, red alert lights, and the faint metallic hum of simulated combat. It was a reconstruction of an old Elthurian fortress, narrow corridors, glowing runes along the walls, and energy panels that flickered when touched. The objective: neutralize hostiles and secure the data core. The moment the countdown hit 0, Lyra darted forward like a shadow, plasma staff whirling. Mason followed, doing his best not to look like a malfunctioning droid. He ducked a laser blast, slid behind cover, and fired back at the glowing drone ahead. "Okay," he muttered through the comm, "not dying is going well so far." Lyra's voice came through calmly. "Focus, human. The drones are adapting." "They can adapt all they want. I'm running purely on caffeine and panic," he replied, blasting another target. For a moment they worked perfectly in sync, her movements sharp, his reactions just quick enough to complement hers. When she vaulted over a wall, he followed, landing beside her with a grin. "See, coordination, I'm improving." She raised an eyebrow. "You are less terrible." He grinned wider. "That's practically a compliment. You're spoiling me, Captain." They moved deeper into the corridor. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the simulation shifted into a higher difficulty phase. The walls began closing in, narrowing the path. Drones dropped from the ceiling, surrounding them. Lyra spun, deflecting a barrage of plasma bolts, but one clipped her arm, sending a flicker of sparks across her armor. Mason reacted instinctively, lunging forward, grabbing her arm, and yanking her behind him as he fired at the nearest drone. "Lieutenant, don't thank me yet," he shouted, dodging another blast. "This is my first heroic moment in months." Lyra stepped beside him, finishing off the remaining drones with a single sweeping motion of her staff. The simulation dissolved into silence. For a moment, only the hum of the ship filled the air. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You shielded me." He shrugged, still catching his breath. "Yeah, well, I figured it's a good habit. Makes up for all the prior hand incidents." Her long ears twitched, and to his astonishment she smiled. A small, genuine, unguarded smile. "Perhaps it does." Before he could reply, Commander Yarick entered the training deck, tall, metallic, and perpetually irritated. Half of his skull was cybernetic, glowing faintly with green circuitry. He looked from Lyra to Mason, his expression like a walking disapproval algorithm. "Lieutenant Hale," he said, voice mechanical and cold. "The entire ship is aware of your physical accident last week. Do you plan to make a habit of drawing attention to yourself during every session?" Mason straightened instantly. "No, sir. This time I limited my heroism to defensive maneuvers." Yarick's artificial eye blinked. "Your sarcasm is not appreciated." "Understood. I'll submit it for review next time." Lyra stepped forward before Yarick could retort. "Commander, Lieutenant Hale's actions were appropriate. He protected a commanding officer under live simulation parameters. His instincts were correct." Yarick regarded her for a long moment. "As you say, Captain, but I advise caution. Cultural entanglements between species complicate command integrity." He turned and left, his boots echoing against the metal floor. Mason exhaled once the door shut. "He really knows how to light up a room, doesn't he?" Lyra's lips twitched again. "He disapproves of nearly everything. It is his function." "Good. I'd hate to think he was just naturally cheerful." They walked out of the training chamber side by side. Mason noticed the faint scorch mark on her armor where the drone had hit. "You should get that looked at." "It's superficial," she said. "Still," he insisted, "you might need, I don't know, alien ointment or whatever you people use." "We people," she repeated, arching an eyebrow. "I mean Elthurians, not in a weird way, just Ah, you know what? I'll stop talking before this becomes another diplomatic incident. Her laughter was soft, quick, and unexpected. You talk too much, human. Occupational hazard, he replied. Words are cheaper than plasma rounds. As they reached the lift, the ship's intercom crackled to life, announcing a maintenance failure in the upper decks. Lyra glanced at him. Report to the command deck at 900 tomorrow. There will be a debrief. He saluted. Aye, Captain, and for the record, thanks for not having me executed that first day. She paused, looking at him with that same unreadable expression. If I had, she said quietly, the ship would be much quieter, but perhaps less interesting. The lift doors closed between them. Mason leaned back against the wall, exhaling a long breath. He was grinning again, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe because she hadn't smiled at anyone else like that. Maybe because he had survived another day without catastrophic humiliation. Or maybe because something about her laughter felt like gravity, impossible to resist, even when you knew it could pull you apart. By the time Mason made it to the command deck the next morning, the entire ship already seemed to know about yesterday's heroic maneuver. The crew's gossip network worked faster than the quantum relay. As he stepped into the lift, 2 junior techs whispered something about the human who saved the Iron Whisper, and quickly pretended to be fascinated by their tablets when he turned around. Mason sighed. I swear, he muttered, if this keeps up, they're going to make an action figure of me, complete with accidental touching function. When the doors opened, Captain Lyra was already at the central holodable, her fingers gliding across its surface, projecting tactical reports into the air. The blue light from the holograms illuminated her features, giving her an almost ethereal calm. Commander Yarick stood beside her, looking like he was born scowling. Mason stood at attention, trying not to trip over his own feet. Lieutenant Hale reporting as ordered. Lyra gave a slight nod. At ease, Lieutenant. We'll be reviewing yesterday's performance. Good, he said, relaxing slightly. Because I've got some thoughts on that simulation. First, those drones definitely cheat. And second, Yarick's mechanical eye flickered. Silence, Lieutenant. Mason shut his mouth immediately. Lyra gestured toward the holo display, which now showed their synchronized movements through the fortress simulation. Your reaction time has improved, she said. Your coordination was acceptable. However, your energy expenditure is inefficient. Mason frowned. I prefer to think of it as enthusiastically tactical. Lyra glanced up from the projection. And your humor is still poorly timed. Yarick made a low, electronic sound that might have been a sigh. Captain T. Varon, if you continue to indulge this human sarcasm, he will assume it is acceptable military conduct. It is not conduct, Lyra replied evenly. It is adaptation. That word hung in the air longer than it should have. Mason didn't entirely understand it, but it made him grin. See, Commander, I'm not a problem. I'm evolution in progress. Then kindly evolve in silence, Yarick said, turning away. After the debriefing, Lyra asked Mason to stay behind. The moment Yarick left, the room felt lighter, almost human. You do enjoy provoking him, she said. Only because it's so easy, Mason replied. If he had a frustration meter, it'd be maxed out every time I breathe. Her ears twitched slightly. He was learning that meant she was trying not to laugh. You are reckless, she said, and yet you adapt quickly. That's just human instinct, he said. We mess up, we improvise, we survive, usually in that order. Curious, she murmured, studying him as if he were an experiment. Among my people, error is shame. Among yours, it is opportunity. He shrugged. If we got ashamed every time we messed up, our species wouldn't have made it past the discovery of fire. I'm pretty sure the first guy who tried to cook meat burned half the forest. This time, she actually laughed, quiet, controlled, but undeniably real. It caught him off guard again, that sound. You continue to surprise me, Lieutenant. Good, he said. That's my specialty, keeping expectations low, then confusing everyone. She deactivated the holodable. I have requested that you join me for advanced coordination drills, privately. Mason blinked. Privately, as in just you and me. Yes, it seems your improvisation may be useful for understanding human unpredictability in combat. Right, he said, trying to play it cool. Purely tactical, no tea this time, I assume. Her eyes glinted. We will see. That evening, the simulation bay was empty except for the two of them. The lights dimmed, and the environment materialized around them, a desolate asteroid surface beneath a shimmering force dome, stars burning cold above. Mason adjusted his visor. Nice scenery, he said. Romantic in a we might die of radiation exposure sort of way. Lyra ignored the comment. This exercise will test reaction, not power. You will learn to predict my movements. He gulped. Predict you. Captain, I can't even predict what my coffee machine will do in the morning. She took her stance, staff in hand, and smiled faintly. Then adapt. The first strike came faster than thought, her staff whirling toward him in a blur of silver light. He barely blocked it, sparks scattering from his energy baton. Then another strike, a sweep at his legs. He jumped, stumbled, and nearly face-planted in simulated dust. You are overthinking, she said calmly. Anticipate, don't analyze. Easier said than done when you're swinging like a blender on turbo. Her next move caught him completely off guard. She disarmed him in a single motion, sending his baton spinning into the air. He lunged instinctively, grabbing her wrist to stop the follow-up strike. For 1 second they froze, eyes locked, the air between them humming with static energy. Her voice lowered slightly. Better. He released her quickly, stepping back. I'm not sure what just happened, but I'm counting it as a win. You learn fast, Lieutenant, she said, retrieving his baton and tossing it back to him. For a species driven mostly by caffeine and chaos. Hey, he said, catching it. Chaos is underrated. It built civilizations, and coffee keeps them running. They reset the simulation, and as they moved again, faster this time, smoother, something unspoken flowed between them, a rhythm neither could explain. It wasn't about technique anymore. It was about trust. Every motion, every glance, every breath fell into sync until it felt like the simulation was reacting to them, not the other way around. When the session ended, the holograms faded, leaving them in the dim blue light of the chamber. Lyra stood still, her breathing steady. You are improving. Thanks, Mason said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Though I think my muscles have filed a protest. She studied him for a long moment. You may yet become a competent soldier. He grinned. Careful, Captain. That almost sounded like a compliment. Do not let it go to your head, she said, turning toward the exit. But before leaving, she looked back, her expression softer. Tomorrow, same time. As the door slid shut behind her, Mason exhaled slowly. He had no idea what kind of line they were crossing, professional, cultural, or cosmic. But one thing was certain. Whatever this was becoming, it was far more dangerous than any training exercise. And somehow, far more irresistible. Mason had just started to believe that life aboard Solara 9 was settling into something almost normal when the ship decided to prove him wrong. The first sign came during breakfast. The floor trembled, his tray jumped, and his cup of synthetic coffee performed a perfect somersault before landing squarely in his lap. That's it, he muttered, standing up as alarms blared. I'm switching to solid food forever. Overhead lights flickered red. The intercom crackled to life with Lyra's voice, calm but firm. All personnel, battle stations. This is not a drill. Mason froze halfway out the door. Not a drill. Those 3 words meant trouble. The kind of trouble that usually involved things exploding and someone yelling at him to do the impossible. He sprinted to the lift, nearly colliding with 2 engineers dragging plasma rifles. Rebels, one shouted. Elthurian separatists. They came out of hyperspace right on top of us. Of course they did, Mason said, slamming the control panel. Wouldn't want the day to get boring. When the lift doors opened, chaos filled the command deck. The holographic display showed enemy ships closing in, sleek Elthurian frigates, black and silver, moving with surgical precision. Mason took his post, the console lighting up under his hands. Lyra stood at the center, issuing orders in flawless composure, her voice a calm blade cutting through panic. "Raise deflectors. Redirect auxiliary power to dorsal shields," she commanded. Then without turning she added, "Lieutenant Hale, weapons control. I trust you know how to aim." "Point and click, ma'am," he said, fingers flying across the console. "Just tell me who to annoy first." She didn't respond, but he caught the faint twitch of her ear, the smallest sign she wasn't entirely immune to humor, even now. The Solara 9 shook violently as plasma fire hit the shields. Warning lights flared. Mason gritted his teeth. "Shields down to 74%. Stabilize them," Lyra ordered. "I'm trying," the power grid S throwing a tantrum. He rerouted circuits, sparks jumping from the panel. "Okay, that's probably fine." Another explosion rocked the deck. A console burst in flame. A crewman stumbled back. Lyra moved instantly, using the butt of her staff to smash the emergency extinguisher case and douse the fire herself. She turned to Mason, eyes sharp. "We cannot sustain this. The rebels are focusing fire on our engines." He checked the scanners. "They're her people, aren't they?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Or they were." The words hung there for half a second, then another volley struck, nearly knocking him off balance. Mason slammed his fist on the console. "All right, enough of this." He pulled up the tactical map and grinned despite himself. "Captain, I have an idea." "Explain." "I'm going to vent plasma through the port maintenance ducts and trick their sensors into thinking we're losing coolant. They'll close in for the kill, and when they do, we hit them with everything." Lyra studied him for a heartbeat, then nodded. "Do it." Mason worked fast, fingers flying. Energy levels fluctuated as blue gas vented into space, forming a shimmering cloud around their ship. On the display, the enemy frigates adjusted course, closing in like predators scenting blood. "Range, 3,000 meters, Lyra said. 2,000, Mason murmured. "Now," she ordered. Mason slammed the firing sequence. Twin plasma cannons roared, slicing through the nearest enemy vessel. The explosion bloomed across the viewport like a miniature sunrise. A cheer erupted from the crew. "Nice shooting," Lyra said, calm but with a glint in her eyes. "See," he said, "total accident as usual." But the celebration died quickly. 3 more ships emerged from hyperspace, larger and faster. The Solara 9 groaned under another barrage. Alarms screamed. Lyra turned toward him, her voice low. "They're not here for the ship, they're here for me." Mason blinked. "Excuse me." She didn't answer immediately, focusing instead on issuing more commands. But between the chaos and the noise, he saw the truth in her face. The rebels weren't firing to destroy. They were trying to capture. Something inside him tightened. "Well, they're going to have to go through me first," he said, gripping the console. "Do not be foolish, Lieutenant," she snapped. "This is not your fight." "With respect, Captain," he said, "your fights have a way of becoming my fights. It's kind of our thing now." The ship jolted again, power flickering, systems stuttering. Lyra barked an order to evacuate non-combat personnel. The lights dimmed, replaced by the red glow of emergency circuits. In the chaos, Mason followed her down the corridor toward engineering. The air smelled of ozone and burnt circuitry. "If we don't stabilize the reactor, we're going to blow ourselves up before they do," he said, prying open a control panel. Lyra crouched beside him, her movements precise even under fire. "Then work fast." "I'm working. Just keep those long-eared sharpshooters off my back." She gave him a sharp look. "You are remarkably unafraid of death." "I'm just too busy panicking to notice." A tremor shook the floor. Mason cursed under his breath. "We're losing containment." He slammed a power conduit, sparks flying. "Okay, that should hold for about 30 seconds. "That is not acceptable." "Then I suggest you invent a miracle, Captain." To his surprise, she did. Lyra reached into her armor and pulled out a crystalline shard that glowed faintly blue. "Elthurian phase stabilizer," she said. "Illegal on most human ships." Illegal sounds great right now, Mason replied. She pressed it against the reactor conduit. The crystal pulsed, fusing with the ship systems. The tremors ceased. The lights steadied. Mason stared. You just patched the reactor with space magic. It is technology, she said. Sure, he muttered. And coffee's a vitamin. The comm crackled again, Yarick's voice metallic and strained. Enemy vessels retreating. Damage control teams report. Lyra exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering. Mason slumped against the bulkhead, heart still pounding. So, he said between breaths, that went better than expected. Lyra glanced at him. You are reckless, disobedient, and fortunate to still be alive. He grinned. You forgot handsome. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Do not test your luck, Lieutenant. They walked back toward the command deck in silence, the hum of the repaired engine steady beneath their feet. Mason could feel the shift between them, something unspoken, heavier than humor but not yet dangerous. As they passed a viewport, the stars stretched endlessly across the dark. Mason stopped, staring at their reflection. You know, he said quietly, if that's what a normal day looks like with you, I'm terrified to see what a bad one is. Lyra looked at him, her blue eyes reflecting the light of the stars. You adapt, she said simply, and then after a pause, and you survive. Guess I learned from the best, he said. She said nothing, but her ears twitched, that same small, betraying motion he had come to recognize. It wasn't a smile, but it was close enough. And somehow it was more than enough. The ship felt different after the battle. The usual hum of the Solara 9 carried a tremor now, as if the metal remembered what it had survived. Bulkheads were scorched, conduits half-melted, and the corridors smelled faintly of ozone and burnt coolant. Mason walked them anyway, pretending everything was fine. That was his method, pretend hard enough, and sometimes the universe played along. When he reached the observation deck, Lyra was already there, standing before the panoramic window that showed a sea of distant stars. Her armor was gone, replaced by a dark uniform that made her seem less a warrior and more something else entirely, something quiet, thoughtful, and far too unreachable. He cleared his throat. Permission to admire the view without looking suspicious. She didn't turn, but her reflection in the glass shifted slightly. You are early, Lieutenant. Yeah, well, punctuality seemed like a good survival tactic after the last few days. I didn't want to be late for my next reprimand. That was not my intent. He grinned faintly. You say that every time. Finally, she looked at him. There was something different in her eyes, tiredness maybe, or something heavier. The council has sent orders, she said. An inquiry will be held. They believe I allowed the rebels to approach deliberately. Mason blinked. Wait, what? They think you let them attack us. They are Elthurians, they seek betrayal in everything. He shook his head. Unbelievable, you literally saved the ship. Half the crew owes you their lives. Politics rarely concern themselves with truth, she said quietly. Mason moved closer, lowering his voice. Then we tell them what happened. Simple. Her gaze met his, and for a moment he felt the full weight of the distance between their worlds. They will not listen. The rebels were Elthurian. I am Elthurian. To them, that is enough. He folded his arms. So what, they just hang you out to dry because of your species? That's not justice, that's bad sci-fi writing. That almost earned a smile. Almost. You deflect fear with humor, she said. It's either that or cry in a corner, he admitted. And I've got a reputation to maintain. Silence settled between them, comfortable but fragile. Beyond the glass, the stars drifted slowly past, indifferent to both their problems. Mason leaned against the railing, watching the glow reflect off the hull. You ever wonder, he said, if all this cooperation stuff is just doomed from the start? Humans, Elthurians, all pretending we understand each other. I did, she said softly, until I met you. He blinked. That's dangerously close to flattery. Her long ears twitched slightly. Do not become arrogant, you are still infuriating. Good, wouldn't want to ruin my brand. But she didn't laugh this time. Her gaze lingered on the stars, her expression unreadable. There is something you should know, she said after a pause. When the rebels transmitted their demands, they called me by another name, one that is not supposed to exist. Mason straightened, and that name would be Lyra of the Second Crest, exiled royal of Elthuria. His jaw dropped. You're a princess. She tilted her head. That word is not accurate in your language. It's close enough. He stared at her. You've been a royal this whole time, and you let me call you Captain Buttarmer during drills. Her composure wavered just for a second. I was not aware of that nickname. He winced. Forget I said that. I cannot. She turned away, but he could swear he saw amusement flicker at the corner of her lips. It faded quickly. The rebels were not merely political. They seek the bloodline I carry. My presence here endangered the entire crew. Well, he said, stepping closer, they're going to have to get through a few bulkheads and one very annoyed human before they try again. You do not comprehend the gravity of this, Lieutenant. If they convince the council that I conspired with them, I will be executed, quietly, efficiently. He shook his head. Not on my watch. Your watch means little beyond this ship. Then I'll make it mean something, he said, more fiercely than he intended. Her eyes softened. You are impossible. And you're terrible at accepting help, he said. We make a great team. There was a long pause before she spoke again. When the inquiry begins, they will ask questions about you, about our sessions, our familiarity. Oh, great, he muttered. So not only am I doomed to die for grabbing your armor once, now I get to testify in alien court. Fantastic. Her voice was quiet now. If they suspect personal attachment, they will use it against both of us. Then we give them nothing, he said. No reason, no angle, just the truth. You followed orders, I followed you. Her gaze lingered on him, unreadable yet full of something heavy, something that made his chest feel tight. You would risk your rank for me. Rank as just a badge, he said. People matter more. She looked away, perhaps to hide the expression that crossed her face. You are a strange man, Mason Hale. Yeah, he said softly. But I'm your strange man, at least for now. That earned him a look, half glare, half disbelief, but she didn't correct him. Instead, she turned back toward the window, her reflection merging with his in the glass. The hearing is in 48 hours, she said. Get some rest. He nodded, though he knew he wouldn't sleep. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. Lieutenant, she said. He looked back. Your earlier gesture of protection, she said, her tone formal but her eyes anything but, was noted and appreciated. He grinned. If you're saying thank you in alien royalty code, I'll take it. Her ears twitched again. Go before I reconsider my gratitude. As he walked away, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that the next 2 days would change everything. He'd faced plasma fire, collapsing hulls, and mechanical death traps. But this, standing beside her, knowing what she really was, this felt like the most dangerous mission yet. Because somewhere between chaos and laughter, between battle drills and shared glances, he'd crossed a line he could never step back from. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to. The tribunal chamber was cold, metallic, and intimidating, a perfect theater for judgment. Mason stood near the center, trying to act composed while simultaneously rehearsing all the excuses, heroic deeds, and accidental gestures that might save him from being canonized as the ship's most disastrous officer, or worse, fired into the void. Lyra stood beside him, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. Her royal lineage had been exposed during the investigation, and whispers of "traitor princess" floated like ghosts through the room. Commander Yarick presided over the tribunal, his mechanical eye flicking through holographic records with unnerving precision. "Lieutenant Hale," he said, voice clipped, "your actions during the recent rebel engagement will be reviewed. Explain your rationale for engaging the enemy in close quarters alongside Captain T. Varon in a manner that defies all protocol." Mason cleared his throat. "With all due respect, sir, my rationale was simple. She's a captain. She's also apparently a secret princess, and she was about to be captured, so I thought it might be a good idea to, keep her alive." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Lyra's ears twitched in the faintest indication of amusement. You jeopardized the ship's operation, Yarick continued, and acted in direct contradiction to orders. I did follow orders, Mason said quickly. I just interpreted them more creatively than usual. He paused. And, technically, everyone survived, including the princess. Lyra stepped forward, her blue eyes locking with his. The lieutenant's actions were instrumental in saving this ship. His intuition, though unconventional, prevented casualties and ensured the reactor remained stable. I recommend his conduct be recognized, not punished. Yarick's eye flickered. Your recommendation is noted, Captain. However, the council will decide. A tense silence followed. Mason shifted his weight, fingers twitching nervously. He wanted to say something clever, something that would tip the balance, but words failed him. Instead, he let Lyra continue. When humans act, she said, voice steady, they do so with unpredictability. This is often mistaken for recklessness. But in this instance, it was precisely that unpredictability that allowed him to respond faster than standard protocols would permit. His instinct saved lives. The tribunal was silent for what felt like eternity. Mason finally broke the silence. So, if I understand correctly, I almost caused interspecies disaster, but instead I get a medal for it. Lyra's lips twitched. You may receive commendation, not chaos. That earned him a small grin. I'll take it. The chamber doors opened and a messenger delivered the council's verdict. Lyra read aloud, her voice calm yet laced with tension. Lieutenant Mason Hale is hereby commended for bravery, quick thinking, and protection of commanding personnel during hostile engagement. Captain Lyra T. Varon is cleared of all allegations. All crew members involved are to return to normal duty. Case closed. Mason exhaled, a grin spreading across his face. Case closed, he repeated, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Later, aboard the observation deck, he and Lyra watched the stars drift past. Silence stretched between them, comfortable now, a shared acknowledgement of everything that had transpired. You acted recklessly, she said softly, almost teasingly, but you are alive. I like to think it's my charm, he replied. And apparently my royal guardian skills are improving. She glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. Do not become arrogant, you are still human. I'll try, he said, but after all this I think I've earned at least a little arrogance. Survived a battle, survived a tribunal, survived an interspecies incident, barely. Lyra's long ears twitched, a subtle sign he had come to recognize. And what of your lessons learned? She asked. He thought about the days since the accidental training incident, the near-death experiences, the quiet moments in her quarters, the chaos and laughter. I've learned that instinct can outweigh protocol, that trust can be built in the strangest ways, and that sometimes it's okay to rely on someone else. She didn't respond, but he could tell she understood. The ship's AI chimed softly, announcing his new commendation. Mason turned toward it. A medal, huh? Guess I'll finally have something shiny to show Leto, or maybe not, I think he'd explode. Lyra smirked faintly. You are a strange human, Lieutenant, and yet indispensable. He grinned. I like that. Does it come with perks? You survived, she said, and that is reward enough. For the first time, Mason allowed himself to look at her differently, not as a commander or a warrior, but as someone who had changed him. He had started as a clumsy, reckless officer, but through chaos, laughter, and danger, he had grown into someone who could face fear, trust instinct, and protect those he cared for. And you, he said quietly, you're not just a captain or a warrior or a secret princess. You're you, and somehow I've managed to make it this far alive with you. Her expression softened, her ears flicking once. It has been an experience. An adventure, he corrected. Yes, she said, finally allowing herself a small, genuine smile. An adventure. As the Solara 9 drifted through the quiet stretch of space, Mason realized that the galaxy had not only tested him but had changed him. He had survived battles, political intrigue, and cultural misunderstandings. And in the midst of all that, he had found a connection, a trust and understanding that bridged worlds. He looked at Lyra, the faint stars reflecting in her eyes, and knew that some risks were worth taking, some mistakes worth making, and some bonds were too important to ignore. "Next training exercise," he said softly, "I promise to keep my hands to myself." Her ears twitched again, almost imperceptibly. "I will hold you to that," she said. And for the first time, Mason Hale felt certain that whatever came next, they would face it together. The stars stretched endlessly before them, but for once he did not feel small. He felt ready.